Chairman and CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America. MPAA named Mr. Rivkin Chairman and CEO in 2017, where he advocates for policies that support film and television production, protect creative content, and open markets. Previously, he served as Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, U.S. Ambassador to France, and spent more than 20 years leading award-winning entertainment business, the Jim Henson Company and Wild Brain. I'll just summarize a little bit more. He served more than 4 years as the U.S. Ambassador to France and Monaco, leading a diplomatic mission that contained 6 constituent posts throughout France and represented more than 50 U.S. government agencies. Prior to his government service, he worked in the media sector for more than 20 years, was named one of the 100 most creative people in the business by Fast Company. And he received his bachelor's degree from Yale, an MBA from Harvard. He was awarded the Legion of Honor with the rank of Commander in 2013 in France. He received the City of Paris's highest honor from the Parisian Mayor Anne Hidalgo in 2015, and was presented with the U.S. Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award by the Secretary of Navy in 2017. So it is my honor to introduce Charles Rivkin.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I got to say, ladies and gentlemen, I am so honored to have the chance for the first time as Chairman and CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America to come here to the Aspen Forum. One of the reasons I'm so excited is that my colleagues who are with me today are longtime participants in this conference, and they say that one of the things they love the most about it is that you can bring your laptop, but also your hiking boots. And what's great about that is that some of the greatest minds in the tech space are in this audience, coming to discuss the timeliest issues of the day, from AI to algorithmic bias. And then you can extend those conversations over walks on the Sunnyside Trail, for example. So it's pretty cool, and I'm excited about having a chance to participate. I have to say, coming here reminds me a little bit of another place that I love on this earth, which is Sun Valley, Idaho. I have a house in Sun Valley. I go there every summer, and whenever I'm there, what I love to do more than anything else is fly fish. And I got to say, when you're in the middle of this river up to your waist, rod in hand, hopefully a trout somewhere nearby, it's just you. But that's when you realize that in all this solitude, you never are truly alone. There are ecosystems around you, no matter where you are, whether it's the river and the natural terrain I was just describing, the rod and the reel in my hand that connect me to a community of other fly fishermen. And there's a rolling series of ecosystems that this mighty river connects in its winding journey to the Pacific Ocean via the Snake and the Columbia rivers. My point here is there are ecosystems everywhere, and their success is governed by natural rules of interdependence. And all too often, we only appreciate the importance of these rules after abuses have caused these ecosystems to break down. But if we're proactively respectful and vigilant, we can ensure their longevity. So today I want to discuss one of the most vibrant and interconnected ecosystems in human history, which is, of course, the internet. And as we meet today, the healthy and vibrant internet that we all want is in serious jeopardy. The title of my speech today is A Declaration of Accountability for Cyberspace, which is a reference I'm sure that's not lost on this audience. And my call for accountability stems from the problem known to everybody today. An avalanche of harms is taking place across online platforms and placing great strain on our society and the values, laws, and norms that have long defined and shaped who we are. And just to name a few of these, they include election meddling and hate speech, and a primary concern of my industry, of course, online piracy. It's further proof of the digital ecosystem's reach that I just have to say a few words, and everybody here knows what I'm talking about. Cambridge Analytica to InfoWars, and that's just in the past few months. Well, today before this group, which represents the wellspring of tech policy and thoughtful debates about its future, I'm calling for a conversation, a national conversation about how we can return the internet to its original promise, a place for vibrant but civil discourse, not one where false reports are retweeted thousands of times around the world before the truth has a chance to log on. A marketplace for businesses both big and small, where we can conduct legitimate commerce, not one that more closely resembles an ungoverned bazaar where far too many goods are fraudulent and counterfeit. This conversation could explore a number of options. Online platforms could increase their voluntary efforts to work with those affected to curb abuse of their services, or maybe Congress could recalibrate the online immunities to more explicitly require proactive steps as a condition of these protections. I'm also asking for the recognition that accountability and interdependence must always be at the foundation of an internet that supports free speech, expression, commerce, creativity, and innovation. Online platforms must do more to mitigate the harms they are enabling, and we must work collectively and collaboratively to address these harms. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not alone in this call. 50 leading civil rights organizations recently sent a letter to Congress expressing their concern with, and I quote, tech companies' inability or unwillingness to police their own platforms. 17 leading conservative groups did the same, declaring that fundamentally, they said, many of the internet's problems result from a lack of accountability. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have joined the chorus as well, including House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee Bob Goodlatte, Senators Richard Blumenthal, Lindsey Graham, Rob Portman, Mark Warner, and Ron Wyden. Ron Wyden, who co-authored the original legislation that shielded internet companies from virtually all legal responsibility for what occurs on their platforms. Platform leaders themselves are beginning to acknowledge their responsibility. Mark Zuckerberg, you guys heard, admirably led the way, saying in his congressional testimony, and I quote, "I agree," he said, "we are responsible for the content on Facebook." Uber's new CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi, put it even more bluntly, and he said, quote, "We have to stand for the content of our platforms. We can't just say, we're a platform, our job is done." Even Tim Berners-Lee, founder of the World Wide Web, has expressed profound disappointment in an internet that, in his words, has, quote, failed instead of served humanity. The crescendo, ladies and gentlemen, is rising within our ecosystem. The message is getting louder by the day. Internet platforms must bear responsibility, and they must do more than address the harms that wittingly or unwittingly they help facilitate. But we all have a role in this. As the internet becomes even more embedded in our lives, globe-spanning problems can only be solved if we address them together. And before I talk about how and when we went astray, as well as present a few ideas about how we can work together going forwards, I'd like to highlight some of the journey that brings me here today and informs my perspective on this ecosystem. You know, as Scott mentioned up front, I worked as a CEO in the film and the television industry for more than 20 years. At the Jim Henson Company, I was proud to head a creative organization whose iconic characters such as Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy and the Muppets had such a positive, entertaining, and educational impact on children and on families around the world. And we produced fantasy and sci-fi classics that some of you guys might know, like Labyrinth and Farscape and The Dark Crystal, that redefined the genre. And at WildBrain, a small startup company, I was proud to be an executive producer of, in my biased opinion, one of the coolest shows on children's television called Yo Gabba Gabba. But you know what? For more than 8 years after my time in the entertainment business, first as the U.S. ambassador to France, and then as Assistant Secretary of State for Economic and Business Affairs, I worked at the intersection of the public and private sectors at a time when both the internet, when both of those sectors were truly transformed by the internet. As ambassador, as you can imagine, advocating for a $19 trillion economy, I advocated for the commercial interests of technology companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon in France and throughout Europe as we work to remove barriers to digital trade and open new avenues for American companies in global internet commerce. As Assistant Secretary of State, I led the bureau at the State Department that had the interagency lead on U.S. internet policy around the world. From multilateral conferences to international plenipotentiaries, we worked hard to stand up for free speech and strengthen internet governance. And now, as chairman and CEO of the Motion Picture Association of America, I'm proud to represent this iconic and storied industry whose founding mission is to defend the First Amendment, free speech, and creativity. I'd like to believe that those are values that are shared by everybody in this room. But I'm also proud to stand for an industry that embraces the transformative power of the digital age. As consumers' digital viewing choices have shifted, we've embraced in our industry that digital revolution. Our companies are active players in the streaming content market. The content we produce today is available on more than 450 legal online distribution services, legal worldwide. And we announce innovative new deals all the time. The Walt Disney Company, for example, just announced they're launching an exciting new streaming service next year. Comcast, I know that Comcast, of course, owns NBC Universal, which is one of our members, and they're represented here today. Comcast is making Amazon Prime Video available on its X1 home entertainment platform. And several of the studios that I work with are embracing Jeffrey Katzenberg's latest venture, a mobile-first video company called New TV. But what's interesting to me is that long before this era of digital transformation, my industry recognized that we needed our own accountability to our audiences, to consumers. And as you know, the Motion Picture Association is the MPAA's movie rating system. The only such system in the world, by the way, that's run by a private entity, not a government, is celebrating its 50th year this year. Amanda Lotz, a Peabody Media Center Fellow and Media Studies Professor at the University of Michigan, discussed how today's platforms actually face many of the same challenges that other media organizations, such as the MPAA, have long since faced and also addressed. We were the first among media companies to develop voluntary standards and practices that allow television networks and movie makers to tell their own stories without interference from the government, to respect the wishes of their audience, and defend against government encroachment on freedom of expression. What I mean to say is that we, in fact, self-regulated to prevent censorship and did so successfully for 50 years. Given the list of disturbing online crimes and abuses that I mentioned earlier today, combating piracy, which, as you know, is a big deal for us, may seem like a small concern in the greater scheme of things. But the theft of creative content is a serious and deeply personal threat from our biggest studios to small but beloved production houses like the Henson Company, where I once worked. I occasionally check in with Lisa Henson, Jim Henson's oldest child, who's currently the CEO of the Henson Company. And her many productions today range from Emmy-nominated Sid the Science Kid to on PBS to Julie's Green Room on Netflix. But anyway, Lisa represents so many things, including the small and medium enterprises that contribute so much to our industry and the entire U.S. economy. And she tells me that in her little company that the internet has now become the greatest source for companies' revenues. But at the same time, illegal streaming and other forms of piracy could lead at any time to her having to have about 100 heartbreaking farewell conversations with people she considers family, the puppeteers, the sound engineers, the writers, the directors, and other employees of her company. For Lisa Henson, piracy is not just some abstraction. Piracy is really personal. And there's an even bigger point to be made about piracy. Online piracy, in our opinion, is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. The same pervasive theft that my industry faces is part of a continuum of toxic developments that harm all of us in this ecosystem, consumers, creators, commercial operators alike. Which leads me to yet another point about who we are. In his book, Television is the new television. Michael Wolff shared a story in which entertainment lawyer Michael Morris convened a group of leading lights from Silicon Valley and Hollywood, and he asked them a simple question. He said, "Are we all in this together?" To which Mark Andreessen replied, "We are against each other. This is a zero-sum game." Well, unfortunately, zero-sum has come to define Silicon Valley's relationship with many industries and institutions, not just our own, and has led to environments where cooperation can be difficult. So let me be clear. My industry is not defending old business models. Quite the opposite, in fact. As I pointed out earlier, like you, we are leading the charge in technological change. But in a world, as Andreessen once observed, where software is eating everything, we've become more interdependent than ever. Distribution platforms, content creators, consumers, users, governments, and industry. And if we want to bring back the internet that we all want, it's better to work together than to cut each other off at the knees. TPI board member, who many of you know, Laura Martin, who I hear couldn't be here with us today, she made a similar point in a recent research note about the future of media. In her words, the US TV ecosystem spent 35 years together, she said, building one of the most successful US consumer products of all time. And that ecosystem, she continued, has proven robust because of the hundreds of frenemy corporations negotiating unique, long-term contracts with each other that forward their own best interests. The implications are pretty clear. Tomorrow's smartest people in the room are going to be the ones that recognize that ecosystem interdependence, defined by strong competition, the rule of law, and good faith contractual negotiations, is a model that should apply to all markets and all ecosystems. So where did this all go astray? I think it's worth examining for a second how we got into this situation in the first place, where some people actually believe that platform immunity, in other words, a complete absence of legal accountability, is somehow a necessary condition for today's vibrant internet. In the early 1990s, the internet was a nascent industry with limitless potential. Internet pioneers made a convincing argument that they needed immunity from the legal obligations that govern most businesses in the physical world. And like a hothouse plant, this nascent industry needed to be protected if it was going to innovate and be competitive, which it clearly did. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and the Safe Harbor in Section 512 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act codified these aspirations into law. But a clear assumption came with this blanket immunity. The assumption was that online platforms would act responsibly and voluntarily to combat online abuses. Internet pioneer John Perry Barlow promised as much in 1996 when he issued his famous Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. And he said, "Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs," he said, "we will identify them, we will address them, and we will fix them by our own means." He and his fellow pioneers of cyberspace would draft their own social contract, he continued, that would follow the golden rule, do unto others. Well, not only have they failed to do that, but the internet of the late 1990s is no longer the internet of today. And as I often said when I led the Economic Bureau at the State Department, the internet economy is the economy. E-commerce is commerce, plain and simple. The internet has become a one-stop destination for life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and we've become a neighborhood of interconnected creators, consumers, and contractors. Years ago, the internet, the online neighborhood was 50 million users, and today it's more than 2 billion. The internet policies that we still have in place were written at a time when online platforms were nascent, but they are nascent no longer. We live in an AI world that's still operating on an AOL policy framework. Yet many platforms still cite statutes. They cite them written to address the specific conditions that existed in the 1990s solely to avoid their own accountability. And I recently laid out some of these views in a letter to Congress, where I concluded there was a vision for the internet, and this wasn't it. It's time to realign our expectations and the incentives that will help us meet them. Now, I have to admit, I was a little bit disappointed and surprised when Some people responded to my letter publicly, calling this perspective anti-consumer, calling it an effort by pre-internet industries to defend old business models, which is an old argument, and it was sad to see made. But I think you'll agree the case for the internet accountability right now could not be more modern or more critical to every single consumer and industry in today's world. Which brings me to the million-dollar question, where do we go from here? So it actually, for me, seems like a century ago when Sony Pictures was maliciously hacked by North Korea. But on the heels of that terrible incident, Michael Schrage wrote a piece in the Harvard Business Review in which he applied the, quote, broken windows theory of urban crime and decay to the internet ecosystem. And the theory goes, actually it came originally from James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, but the theory goes that if there's one broken window and it's left unrepaired, it's a clear signal to the community that the community tolerates not only this, but even greater law-breaking. It's just a matter of time before all the windows are broken and crime has completely taken over the neighborhood. At that time, Schrage rightly concluded that we were rapidly witnessing and experiencing the accelerating erosion of civil digital society. His point was clear. Just as any community must work together to fix those broken windows, we must do the same for digital civil society or face an escalation of harms and ills. And right now, that commitment doesn't exist in the digital space, in theory or in practice. But from our perspective, we really have seen some powerful examples of how we can begin the collaborative effort to turn the tide in the right direction. We're honored to call Amazon one of the biggest and most important of the internet platforms. We're honored to call them a partner in the Alliance for Creativity and Entertainment, what we call ACE. It's a global anti-piracy organization whose members include the 6 MPAA studios, as well as Amazon, HBO, Netflix, and 24 other global companies. And we're grateful that Amazon has proactive programs in place that protect trademarks and help curb counterfeiting. For example, Amazon's brand registry gives rights owners advanced tools, including search capabilities, to protect their brands from counterfeits. And a system of theirs known as Transparency in the US uses alphanumeric codes to authenticate products, and it's designed to achieve similar outcomes. It's really extraordinary. And when it comes to combating piracy, YouTube's Content ID is also a good example of a platform taking proactive steps to help fight illicit activity. At the MPAA, we work with the advertising community to help companies keep track of where their ads are going. We're also working with payment processors like MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal to prevent pirates from using these organizations' financial networks to fund their unlawful online activities. But there's so much more that can be done. And ladies and gentlemen, the case for online platforms to step forward and become accountable at this time could not be more clear. And thanks in large part to the protections that nurtured them, they become some of the best resourced and most sophisticated companies in the world. They not only are morally and duty-bound, they're supremely qualified to solve these problems at their very core. When we think about consumers and the constellation of aspiration, dreams, and economic prosperity that they can bring to the internet, there is no other recourse. We can and must do better. There are too many online windows broken and left unfixed for us to do anything but take collective action and take it now. Well, you've heard my perspective, informed by my time leading creative companies in the private sector and leading internet policy when I served the U.S. government at the State Department. And I've had the opportunity to see some of these issues from many different sides, and I'm greatly encouraged that this dialogue is going to continue on the next panel, where we're going to hear a lot more interesting and diverse perspectives. That conversation is really important to all of us. We intend to be constructive participants as it continues to unfold, and I know that my colleagues Ben and Greg and Neil, who are there in the front row, are going to continue this conversation with all of you over the next few days. So I am so honored to have had the chance to talk to you, and before I leave, I just want to leave with a couple extra thoughts. At the State Department, my bureau convened what we used to call Global Entrepreneurship Summits, GES, to support the aspirations of entrepreneurs everywhere. And one of the summits, the final one actually, brought us to Silicon Valley, which was the promised land for so many of these international dreamers. And what I saw there was amazing technology, beyond amazing. But what I also saw was the human spirit behind it. These minds were never daunted by what others told them was impossible. They were too busy working towards yes to ever take no for an answer. I've seen what Silicon Valley is capable of. I've witnessed it. And I can't help but imagine the success if the online platforms could evolve from being at the heart of the problem to being architects of our shared success. Every stakeholder, including us, must be a player in that shared success. All of us, teaming our collective technological might with our common resolve. All of us working together to create safeguards against abuses. All of us fixing these broken windows and restoring order to our digital neighborhood. And like those brilliant minds in Silicon Valley, all of us working together towards yes. At the end of the day, we all want this ecosystem of ours to thrive for generations to come. Thank you so much.